Welcome to Inside the Set with SETDECOR. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations when we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators and get to hear firsthand accounts of how these works of art came to be. From their inception, ideas on a page, to completion, where we get to sit in the dark and experience them collectively. Welcome to Inside the Set with SETDECOR. I'm Gene Serdena, an SDSA member. Today, I'm pleased to welcome production designer Florencia Martin, SDSA, and set decorator Ryan Watson, SDSA, to discuss their collaboration on Licorice Pizza. And I'd like to start at the beginning, we usually do in these interviews, where you guys give us a little bit of your background and tell us how you came to your respective crafts. So why don't we start with you, Ryan?
So about 13 years ago, I was living and working in Portland, Oregon in the art world, kind of on track to becoming a gallery director. And I was just looking around at my surroundings and had this very strong desire to uproot and move to Los Angeles. And I started on two separate paths. I was kind of both going for the art world and also for art department jobs at the same time. And it was the art department world that really started to show a lot of opportunity for me. I was working in print mostly at first as a coordinator and a buyer, working on ad campaigns and such. And then eventually indie movie world started coming around, and by my third film, I was working on a Greg Araki film and got my big break. It flipped to union, so I became a set decorator. And then my next project was HBO Looking, and everything else has just kind of come after that.
Fantastic. Florencia, how about yourself?
Yes, so I came into production design through theater. I studied theater design at Carnegie Mellon University, and I wasn't aware of film production design until I came back to Los Angeles, which is where I'm from, and met incredible people in the art department and got my first job as an assistant in the art department, and then came up working with incredible production designers and set decorators. And then my journey went into set decoration. I was really enamored and in love with the idea of building a set and working with incredible decorators like Amy Wells and Jean Serdena on many incredible projects that really showed me the way of how film design is an incredible medium for production. And so then full circle, after working as a set decorator, I came back into it as a production designer and working on Licorice Pizza.
Excellent. I'm so pleased to be discussing the design and decor of your film today. Licorice Pizza has movement and velocity. The characters are often running or moving through fields of color and through dark and light. I noticed there's a sort of a cinema verite quality or kind of a documentary-like feel to the film. And I think that people can sort of make an assumption that, oh, they just went somewhere and they photographed these people walking for these vast lengths of things. And I know there's a lot more to it. So I thought maybe you could touch on that for a bit. Florencia?
Yeah, so Licorice Pizza is a film about two young adults who are falling in love, but at the same time, they're finding themselves. And through that, we kind of fall into times in their life and locations in their life at various moments with no introduction or a lot of times no ending. And a lot of the stitching that you see that happens very quickly as these characters are running around the valley, kind of interchanging from one place to another. We spent a lot of time looking at a lot of interiors that had good exteriors, and a lot of locations that really put you into the setting of what the San Fernando Valley looked like in the early 70s. So in that process, obviously we do a lot of scouting to first find a location that either emits a quality of like freedom, which we used a lot of undeveloped parking lots or fields that didn't have buildings because, you know, the valley wasn't as developed as it is today, or whether it's a stretch of storefronts that had distinctive architectural features from the development of the San Fernando Valley in the 50s until the 70s. And just always being conscious of obviously like being true to the period, and also what that feeling would evoke, like for when, for example, Lana and Gary embrace outside of the police station and then take off in the middle of the street, the residential street in Hollywood that was lined with historical Hollywood apartments. So always, I think when you're scouting for a location, it's pinpointing, you know, where can we manipulate to feel like the period, and also tell a story of the emotion in the place that lines up with their characters.
Well, it was really well done and really well stitched.
Thank you.
Ryan, I'm curious, what were some of the challenges behind doing these long stretches of set that become photographed, like those long tracking shots past shops? And there's also a lot of considerations for nighttime photography. So I know that there's a lot of practical lighting considerations that come up. So maybe you could touch on that.
Yeah, storefronts. We had a lot of them in this one. Yeah, in terms of lighting, also bringing in like neon lights and all different kinds of practicals so that you can get a little bit more interest as you're walking down the street. Even the teenage fair comes to mind because there's the scene of them setting up and Gary and Alana walking through all of the different vendors setting up, and it was very planned out, the pathway that Gary and Alana were going to be walking through and where the camera was. I know Florencia worked with Paul pretty extensively about which spots were going to be highlighted, and the movement presented a challenge in that we had to dress essentially an entire Palladium theater with things from the teenage fair from that period, from the 70s, the early 70s.
One of the things that I was struck by, and it really is the character of the event, is that if I compare it to sort of a lot of expo stuff that gets set up today, vendor booths and so forth, it has a very corporate feel often to it, the print quality and stuff. And there's something very handmade that is, I mean, it's something that's really tangible as we're walking through the space, and you get a sense of it being a very different era. And yeah, I thought that was really well done.
Yeah, and speaking to that, you know, I always try both from set decoration now into production design to find artists that can produce specific pieces for us. And so I think what's so successful about the teenage fair is when we were looking at research, it was all this like homemade by teenage signage, and it had a lot of character and love. And so we worked with an artist, Ben Cleave, who did a lot of the title cards and the radio poster, and then our graphic designer, Carrie Hyatt, who recreated so many of the key elements from the teenage fair, like the Pepsi posters and the big wraparounds that like just put you, you know, in wayfinding signs, go this way, a little bit of that corporate feeling that really set the tone for that fair.
It was fantastic. I want to rewind for just a second, and I'm very curious about this. You know, the film has a very unconventional structure to it, and I was curious about how you were struck, or what your reaction might have been when you first read the script and started to think about how this gets translated in visual terms. And maybe you could address that for a moment.
So from reading the script and struck by how many real events are in our story, from the creation of waterbeds to the resurrection of the pinball, the oil crisis, mayoral campaigns. So, I mean, tonally, it really started with a lot of research, both from Paul and I, of jumping into a lot of newspaper articles actually from the time, and anecdotes from everyone from the valley that you would find, tell you a story about Tail of the Cock and tell you a story about getting pinballs. And so after reading the script, it just felt that we were telling a story that was a very honest depiction of that time, and that we were going to follow these characters and at a fast pace. Paul was always really, it was great that he always was very clear that he wanted to keep the story going, and that we weren't going to get hung up on where we were. And that for me, in the design period, it wanted to be a really true sense of place, both in the demographic of each character and setting that with a color palette that was also true to the character and not being overly, design heavy, I suppose, into like what would be outside of the comforts of the San Fernando Valley, which was a suburban area development of Los Angeles that began in the 50s and came through to the 70s. So then we also spoke a lot about, the idyllic era and boom of the 1950s and how that, how that was feeling by the 70s, and introducing those different eras into the film was really important.
Ryan, I would imagine when you first encountered the script and you saw all of these sort of sets that are not teeny tiny sets, but that occupy an eighth or a quarter or half a page, that must have been rather daunting.
It certainly was. There was at least 50 sets, I believe, that we did, not including any of the exteriors or the storefronts or anything like that, but meaty sets there was a good amount of stuff that had to be done. But there were certain sets like Tail of the Cock, which, a lot of scenes take place there. And so we spent a lot of time and a lot of love on that location specifically.
So early on, Paul had talked to me about these classic American eateries in the Valley in Los Angeles, where everyone would gather, from the women's club to your every Friday night dinner with your mom and dad to celebrity watering hole. And it seemed to be like a really foundational place that our characters would be coming back to, that had very specific notes in the memories of people who would be customers here. They were dark spaces with stained glass windows that you couldn't tell what time of day it was, that you would customarily fall asleep in the booth after your third Shirley Temple with your mom and dad. And so we started the hunt looking at actual working restaurants in the Valley, and a lot of them have been in films. So we steered towards a restaurant out way like past Rancho Cucamonga that we thought we were definitely going to shoot at. And then we realized we just lacked like the amount of control that we wanted. And so we came back to a location that Paul had shot at before at the Van Nuys golf course called Billingsley's, which is now a defunct and closed down restaurant. But it was so exciting. The moment we walked in there, the open plan from looking into the bar down into the dining area, I thought was like the perfect place to build out this restaurant. And the red booths that were iconic to these restaurants in this era. And then what wasn't so beneficial for us was these huge, beautiful, but massive windows looking out into the golf course. And so the very fun and exciting challenge was to design these wall units that enclose the space. And we got to actually work with a vendor who handmade, I think, 24 stained glass windows for us that we like designed into these wall plugs that set designer Andrew Leach and I worked on. And then we worked really closely in all of redoing the entire lighting package for the restaurant, which is a huge feat that Ryan can speak into, but touching into the classical American colonial style that you can see in a lot, and huge research was actually postcards. The 50s on, all American restaurants have released, really amazing postcards that showed what the entire interior looked like. So that was our foundation onto what the, historical notes were and the aesthetic notes to hit. And then we brought in the red carpet again, and on the exterior, we brought the iconic sign that we built on location that was, about 30 feet. That was quite a feat on its own. And our own creative construction coordinator, Anthony Hughes, worked with various sign shops to make this happen and actually source the original sign manufacturer who would work on the tail of the cock sign. So it's pretty amazing to, get sign shops like Universal and Dangling Carrot, who are, huge and Trio assets to help us make all of this come to life.
Any particular challenges for you at that location, Ryan, that you'd care to comment on for the tail of the cock?
I think, Florencia already brought it up a little bit, but the lighting, it was a humongous space and we had to bring in all of the lighting. And we wanted it to be in that sort of colonial style that she was talking about that was, ever present during that period of time. And so it was a real challenge to, find lighting that you could get that kind of quantity in, So I feel like that was our biggest challenge in that space.
Right, and related to lighting, what format were you guys shooting in? Were you using film? Were you shooting in digital?
We were shooting in film, and we were shooting a warm from camera test. We noticed that the stock that Paul chose was pretty warm. Mm-hmm. So we were really conscious throughout to make sure we stuck in cooler tones or warm tones if we really wanted to. And going back actually to the exterior spaces, we changed out every single Cobra Head street light, Ryan and his team, to be mercury lights, because now every street in LA is LED. And obviously, as a period visual standpoint, we wanted to make sure it had that fall and classic shape that you can recognize in a lot of amazing street photography of that time, but also for lighting, for set lighting, it creates a blue tone light as opposed to the bright white of an LED or then an orange light from halogen. So it was great to work with Mike Bauman and Paul on the specifics of, color, temperature, and how that affected the film stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. My own experience has been that it's sort of a unique set of considerations that have to be taken into account to accommodate shooting in film rather than in digital. And I can appreciate all the work that went into that. Flo, you brought something up that was really interesting about the reality of the sets. And one of the things that I wanted to touch on is I just have an impression that in a lot of, there's a tendency in a lot of period filmmaking to sort of crowd the frame with images that are iconic to the period, with the rich palettes and patterns. And I feel like often that gives rise to a sort of kitsch factor, and that sort of makes everything a not so subtle joke. And one of the things that I love about this movie is I felt like there was a really deliberate intention to resist that impulse and to pull it back from that edge. And I loved it. And I would love, Ryan, maybe you can talk about that a little bit, because I know how easy it is to lapse into all the iconic pieces and go, let's make sure all of this winds up on this wall. Maybe you could talk about sort of what some of the effort was behind bringing us more into a real space.
Yeah, I think that we were pretty restrained when it came from wallpaper. I kind of feel like that's typically what a lot of people use to show period. And I was really pleased that we only used it a few times, and when we did, it was very punchy and needed in those moments. But and I feel like that is something that makes this a little bit more unique and a little bit more realistic. And then some of our sets are a little bit rough around the edges, some of our office spaces, and um, you know, just keeping it sort of clean and uh, scaled back.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was a really deliberate decision in the fact that it's a story about these two young adults. And so their lives aren't complicated yet through all of the things that we find as adults and all the stacks of paperwork and bills. You know, they're still trying to figure it out. And so, in a lot of the photography images that we looked at together from the 70s, you know, people just didn't have that many things. Teenagers didn't have the accumulation of objects that they do now. They held on to a lot of things that they did as they were children. Um, Both of our young characters live at home with their parents, so they're also crossing that line of their things are in their room, and you know, the living room is just the living room, and the rumpus room, it's different from how things are today. And so, you know, as we were designing and I think decorating these spaces, just really mindful to what objects of theirs would have made their way out into the living room or the den. And for Alana's room, you know, what was she still holding on to as a child? And then everywhere that we were manipulating or building or decorating was there in the San Fernando Valley in this period. And that is just so inspirational on its own that it leads to just like a really strong skeleton to build off of for this period. And I mean, it was just so fortunate. I mean, we do get to work on a lot of films that are set in LA, but to really be hunting and searching and then transforming these spaces in the San Fernando Valley for the meaning of the story, it was really like a special experience.
One of the other things I was impressed by was sort of the scale of the environments. Yeah, I noticed, you know, there's also a tendency in a lot of filmmaking to find spaces that accommodate elaborate photography setups. And then you wind up with these spaces that I know just from my perspective, it's often hard to believe that the characters inhabit such space. And one of the things that I found really interesting about the film is, you know, the spaces are often cramped. You know, like you see all the members of Alana's family sort of moving around this house, and the camera following them through different spaces. And I love things that are rendered on a realistic scale like that. And it was really beautifully done.
Well, you know, we did look at a lot of different architectural styles for Ohana, ranch style homes, large cottage homes, and what felt like the most appropriate for mid-class level family was a tract house development, which happened in the San Fernando Valley in the 50s. And so what's so unique about this house, which is in a cul-de-sac off Coldwater Canyon, is that it has a full kitchen, dining room, living room, 3 bedrooms, and 2 bathrooms, a front yard, a basketball court, and a backyard, all on one small plot of land. That leads to that voyeuristic and unique camera movement.
Here we are at Gary Valentine's house. Why don't we talk a little bit about this interior? Ryan, why don't you walk us through it a little bit?
So this house, one of the things that Flo and I had talked about from the very beginning is that, Gary's mother's not around a lot, that this house actually kind of feels like the boys live here. So we have two different rooms. We have sort of the den, or like the family room, where there's the TV, and the area where the boys hang out for the majority of the time. And so it has a youthful feeling to it. It's clearly not like a put together space, you know? And there's little elements of both the brothers in here. And it was really nice to see the characters move into the space, and they kind of, you know, moved things around a little bit too, that kind of added a touch of realness, just that youthfulness to it. So I really enjoyed putting together Gary's space.
I think Ryan did an incredible job in finding furniture from different eras, like that mom had put together the house, you know, in the 50s or 60s, and then finding pieces that were worn in and loved by, you know, the brothers. As Ryan was mentioning, that this is a home that is led by a 15-year-old and his, you know, friends every evening. So, you know, we had wet towels on the chairs and fast food embedded in the rugs, and it was really nice to get the time to put a lot of detail into making this feel like their home.
I like that the television was always on too. It just felt like it, you know, the active television was like an ever-present character in the room.
And that was really fun to source all of the. Since we don't do anything in post, we try not to do anything in post-production or use any green screens. Deb Ricketts is a video researcher who pulled a lot of commercials and television shows, and this incredible kids game show that's on in one of the scenes. That was actually incredibly inappropriate but amazing dialogue that you can hear in the background. That was really special to have that actively on in the scene while our actors were there. So,
you know what else we can't forget to talk about is Fat Bernie's Waterbeds, and then which later becomes Fat Bernie's Pinball Arcade.
Fat Bernie's is a store for rent that we found in Chatsworth, which is a line of storefronts that we converted back into the 1970s. And our design theory was that Gary and his friends, he had a few handy friends, built out the store with waterbeds and custom signs, and then they stole some artwork and furniture from their parents' house and cobbled together their idea of a kind of groovy and fun waterbed store. So there's like a mismatch feeling. And then we built this partition wall to give some depth to the space and look into a back room and bathroom that was later reinvented and redesigned for when Fat Bernie's Waterbed store becomes a Pinball Palace, which we tiled the entire interior, painted it red, and sourced pinball machines from the era. And I was really thrilled to work with some incredible sign painters and our graphic designer, Carrie Hyatt and Dan Chadwick, who did an incredible job of recreating the lettering of that era, and that we actually get the resources and we're able to physically paint the storefronts. And I think it just really adds a dynamic and playful setting to the now legal and exciting Pinball Palace that Gary and his friends put together. Because at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of kids who had this business idea. It's a pretty fun concept, and it was a really fun set to get to do.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, Ryan, in addition to Fat Bernie's, because I know we have so much exterior photography and then views where we're looking out. So my guess is that you probably had to contend with other adjacent buildings and buildings across the street and stuff like that, that also needed appropriate dressings for the period.
Absolutely. Yeah. This location specifically, I think we had around 12 additional storefronts that we had to do. And we had, I think, Florencia, you were trying to actually find what the actual businesses that were next to the Pat Bernie's original store was. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Because what we did was we wanted to truly pay tribute to the valley. And so when we were at locations like the El Portal Theater in off Lincolnshire or at Pat Bernie's on Chatsworth, that whatever that surrounding stores were in 1973, which we took from newspapers.com or other photographic reference, we actually recreated that true to what was there. And in some cases, like you can see here in the Magic Muffler, which was catty corner to Joel Walks, all the original can signage holders were there. So it just is really cool to be like, just rewind hands of time and provide that, moment of nostalgia and truth to, where we were.
And I'm just curious, but a store full of water beds in 2021 or 2020, where did you guys find water beds, or did you have to have them custom made? And were they real water beds, most of them, or was it an effect? Talk about that a little bit, Ryan.
Yeah, they are all custom, and they're all based off of designs that was at the original waterbed store. And we had Paramount manufacture most of these beds. We had Warner Brothers upholster most of these. We found a vendor in, I believe, Garden Grove called Sterling Sleep Systems, and they actually still construct waterbed bladders. And we had them custom make bladders for all of these beds. And it was quite a quite a thing to take on, but it was really fun, and it looks fantastic, and super happy that we went to all that trouble.
I mean, there's a bunch of sets that it's like almost like a cameo appearance by a set. I think of the Lucy Under One Roof with the bunk beds in front of the white cyc. I loved that set. I think of, and this one was a small one, but the bathroom in the Japanese restaurant where Alana runs into an old friend and the friend gives her a bit of information about Gary that makes her very sad, and it was like the perfect setting for that moment. And the Gary Sears commercial audition, absolutely like a wonderful moment in the story. And then one of my favorites, the Mr. Jack's wig salon, where Gary discovers the first waterbed. I mean, these were like brief moments in the story, but they all contributed something really special, and they all had a special character to them. And I know that often when something makes a brief appearance in the story, there, as at a higher level, there's a lot of resistance towards like putting any of your resources into making that a special moment. But at the same time, I know for design teams, you want those to be special moments, and you want to create an impression. And I thought maybe you could talk about some of your favorite of those moments and favorite sets.
I love the John Peters bedroom. That was a house that was under construction that the owners allowed us to come in and build our own set from within. And Paul planned a shot pushing into Gary and Alana and wanted to have reflections into the room so that we could see what else was happening. So it wasn't a flat shot looking out on the wall. So we actually got to build an amazing built-in mirror and fabric wall unit that I worked with Ryan on. That was one of my absolute favorites because the entire unit gimbals, and so therefore you couldn't see the crew and the camera as it's pushing into Gary and Alana into this intimate moment. So I find it really rewarding when we're able to work on location and still be conscious about what elements stand out for the story, and finding those little sweet spots. There's a lot of sets on this movie, so I feel like there's a lot of moments, a lot of favorites. Even an empty dirt lot in a really good looking alley, where sometimes things that people don't talk about, but really, I think, tell the story of what the San Fernando Valley looks like, and really amazing to be able to control 4 blocks of a back alley that was all period. Was pretty cool.
Yeah, I know sometimes even the most banal settings can have a sort of poetic beauty to them. And I really found that to be the case, going past long lines of cars that were the result of the oil embargo, the gas shortage. And I lived through that moment, and I recall it very vividly. And so I felt like it was brought back in a very realistic way. Ryan, I'm curious, what were some of your favorite moments, or was there a special moment where you got to focus on a detail of something that just really excited you?
Yeah, you brought up 2 of my favorites, actually. One was the performance on the Jerry Best show, which was actually a recreation of a real moment between Lucille Ball and Ed Sullivan. And we basically recreated that entire scene. And being able to do the backstage where all the guys are getting ready beforehand, going over to History for Hire and renting all the amazing camera equipment and backstage equipment. I really, truly loved that scene. And I also really loved Mr. Jack's wig shop. One of my absolute favorites. And we were able to really go there with it. We found a vendor called Wilshire Wigs, and they had all kinds of old wig stock and all these amazing heads and dryers and all kinds of supplies that they had been holding on to since the 70s. And it was all just in a lockup, and they rented it all to us. So we actually got to really fulfill that store like to the T. I thought I really enjoyed that.
I'm curious, Brian, you brought up History for Hire. Were there any other vendors that were really meant a lot to you, that were able to help you, and particularly if there was any SDSA business members that offered any goods or services that were of value to you?
Absolutely. Omega was indispensable. This was a project that started up, one of the very first projects that started up during after lockdown, excuse me. It was mid-July when we started back. And at Omega, it was basically just Alan by himself. He had like maybe 2 other people with him. WB was actually closed, and they had to open up for us specially to get in there. So definitely Omega, Warner Brothers, Uni. Like I said earlier, Paramount did all the custom beds for us, History for Hire. You Frame It did a lot of stuff with us, Practical Props, Modernica, Sony, Premiere. Vintage Arcade Superstore was the one that helped us source all of the pinball machines from the late 70s and early 80s. They were huge. King Richard's was big for us. Wirtz Brothers. We really scoured, though, all of Southern California. We went to Orange County, we went to Long Beach, we went to Pomona. We were all over the place, and pretty much everything that we purchased or rented was actually from the Los Angeles area.
Before we do our closing, I'm wondering, are there any things that we didn't get a chance to touch on that either of you would care to comment on, or any shout outs that you'd like to make?
I would love to just thank our entire crew on Licorice Pizza. As we were talking, this started early when we were coming out of lockdown, and it really was the passion and the trust that everyone came together to make this project happen. And I'm very thankful to Brian, his whole team, our construction coordinator, Anthony Syracuse, and Adrian Valdez, our scenic artist, and everyone who came together to make this film happen. We couldn't do it without them.
Yeah, I had an absolute incredible buying team on this one. Kathleen Rosen, Ethan Goodwin, Joanna Vaneski helped us put together the teenage fair. She was indispensable. Ruben Abarca was our draper, and Anthony Carlino, our lead man, and the entire crew. We had a really stellar crew.
Fantastic. You guys just made a really lovely film, and I'm so delighted that we got to talk about this today. And I hope everyone goes and sees it, because it's really wonderful. Many thanks to the Set Decorator Society of America and MGM and United Artists Releasing, the studios that brought us Licorice Pizza. Inside the Set with Set Decor would like to thank our guests, Florencia Martin and Ryan Watson, for your artistry and your willingness to discuss your craft with our audience. It's a wonderful film, and we look forward to seeing what you have next. Thank you.
Thank you, Gene.
Thanks for joining us for this edition of Inside the Set with SETDECOR. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.